My name is Michael Goldberg, and I am the executive director of our Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship at Case Western Reserve University. I'm also an associate professor in the Weatherhead School of Management, and we are back on campus, although not physically at the moment, but we're thrilled to welcome students back to classes this week, some in person, some remote. We're still doing all of our Veale speaker series events remotely, and it's great to have you all here today. For those that are joining for the first time, these are very interactive, and as Al said, as we were sort of warming up, the more questions and the harder questions, the better. And I'm going to turn it over to Errol in a second. All of our speaker series events are moderated by students, and we have a wonderful student, Errol Balkovich, who I think is the first moderator that we have that is joining us from Sarajevo in Bosnia. So we're super global here at the Veale Institute. So Errol, it's great to have you joining as he does this semester remotely from Sarajevo. If you're watching on LinkedIn Live and you have questions, just put your question in the comment, and then Doug DiGirolamo, who's our colleague at Veale, and I'll make sure we feed them to Errol. If you're joining us on Zoom, just either sort of raise your hand using the participant or put a comment in our Zoom chat just to let Errol know that you have a question, and he'll ask you to unmute and ask your question, or you can read your question directly. And so Errol, thank you for moderating. Al, thank you so much for joining us today and for everything that you do for Case Western Reserve University and the Veale Institute. And with that, let me turn it over to Errol, who will run the show.
Okay, so for a start, I'm going to ask you questions, and then later on, and anyone can ask questions if they have any. So for start, Dr. Reem, you've had like a pretty interesting career path. You went from a PhD in physics at Stanford to being a CEO at a consumer products tech company. So can you tell us more about how and why you've decided to steer your professional life in such a way?
Really good question. Thanks. First of all, I have to comment, Christian Swole, I love the picture. I think that's Venice. And I think I've been there, and it looks that exact spot.
Thank you.
Really.
I miss it.
So, yeah, so it's interesting. You use the word steer. I think that I would not describe my own experience as steering my career path. I think my career kind of steered me. And I think that's true in a lot of different circumstances because, I got my PhD 30 years ago, and the careers that were available, the things that people were interested in doing at that time, some of them don't exist, and the stuff that's probably the most exciting certainly didn't exist. Some of the stuff that we were working on doesn't exist now, but there's a whole bunch of new stuff. So I think that you kind of, the careers and life steers you, and then you take advantage of opportunities or not as they come. There were certain guideposts for me, though, I would say, in the sense that after getting my PhD, I knew I didn't want to go into academia. This was the early 90s, and there was a big prediction that all of the the baby boom post World War II generation of professors were going to be retiring. Well, guess what? It didn't happen because there was a recession, and so there weren't a lot of academia jobs. Plus, that just wasn't my calling. So I started my career as a bench scientist at a large technical services company, a multi-billion-dollar technical services company in the Washington, D.C. area. Spent about 15 years there, and the advantage of working at a large company is you can hold many, many different jobs. And I ran a division. I started as a bench scientist. I ran a division, a P&L. I started a group called the Center for Advanced Materials and Nanotechnology. I was a chief scientist of a very large business unit. So I had a lot of different jobs. And in 2007, I dropped all those things and came to Ohio to take over as CEO of Kent Displays, which is a whole nother story, another path. But I think the last thing I would leave with on that topic is the physics angle. So I think that the differences of being a bench scientist and running a consumer electronics company as CEO. I mean, it's completely different. I mean, and one doesn't train you to do the other, for sure. Both ways, actually. But what I would say is, I think that the advantage or one of the features of being a physicist is that you are really well adept at solving complex problems. And, business is about complexity, and you're kind of fearless about the ability to tackle complex problems. And that's one of the things that I think really helped me in my career. And whatever you go down, I know you're a physics major, Errol, and, we've talked, I think that's an important element. Thanks.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for sharing that insight, especially about physics. And I'm sure a lot of engineering fields are.
Oh, yeah, very similar.
Yeah. So as an experienced and accomplished entrepreneur, what do you believe are like the most important characteristics of a successful entrepreneur?
Okay, so I think probably there are a couple of things that jump out at me, sort of learning from the School of Hard Knocks. The first thing I would say is probably resilience, because most of the time the answer is no, and that's, you have to be able to take no's. That's also true in sales, by the way. that you have to be resilient to know, no means no, but it doesn't mean you can't do something different. And the fact of the matter is, the easy problems have already been done, and so there's lots of challenges and there's lots of wrong paths that you can go down. I think the other thing that really jumped out at me as something I learned was an adage I've used of be cautious of those that know too much. When I was running Kent Displays, we decided to do something that no one else had done before at a company that was completely unfamiliar with, and that was really to launch a consumer product, and to turn the company from basically an R&D technical services company to a consumer packaged goods company. And I will tell you that if there had been anyone in the company that knew what that involved, they would have said, no way, but we did it, and we did it successfully. And, I can think back to many times where I was talking to people and they know do so much more than I did. And they did know so much more than I did. But, hey, I mean, we didn't ultimately follow their advice. But, you have to be prudent, but you also have to be cautious of those that know too much. That's one of my learnings, I think.
Okay. So at least for like some of us, like students here on this call, we're pretty unfamiliar with, like, I guess, the business entrepreneurship world. So can you like compare the business and entrepreneurship world, to the school environment, something that we're all here familiar with? I mean, students here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there are, again, a couple things guideposts that jump out at me that I've told students who are about to graduate or recent graduates. One thing is that when you're in school, you're in an environment where the culture, the basic culture is that there are those that are your superiors, and that's the faculty, the teachers, that are there to help you. Okay, that is their job. That is the fundamental premise of school. Okay, and one of, I think, my early, very hard lessons learned when I left school and went into the work environment is that assumption does not hold in the business world. That you go in sort of thinking, well, those above you are there to help you and move you along the path, and that may or may not be true. And that is a bit of a wake up call, because a lot of, I want to say kids, but students, recent graduates don't really recognize that the business world doesn't necessarily operate that way. So that's one of the things that jumps out at me. The other thing that I think really jumps out at me is that this is particularly true in college, probably less true in graduate school, and maybe even less true now than 30 years ago or when I was a student. But in school, the setup is that, so you go and you there's a subject, and you go and you study that subject, and the teacher or the instructor, they ask you questions and you provide the answers, and you get graded or evaluated on whether your answers are right or wrong. And in the business world, it's really different. The focus, and I really tell this to students all the time, the focus isn't and should not be on simply answering questions that are posed to you. Those that are really successful are the ones that learn how to ask the right questions, because you can get all of the right answers to the wrong questions and nobody cares. And so the fact is that I encourage students to focus their energies on asking the right questions. And once you can ask the right questions, and by the way, you won't know if you've asked the right questions, but you get some experience in that once you can pose and ask the right question, there are plenty of people, including yourself, that can answer it. But the focus is get the question right, because that's really where the big gains are, asking the right questions. So from the audience, can I get ask some right questions, not hard questions? I feel privileged that a lot of the list of the people I'm looking at here on the Zoom participants are people I know. So
great. Who wants to ask the first question?
I'll ask a question.
All right. And Mark, just please introduce yourself for everybody so they know.
I'm Mark Haberbush. I'm the Director of Programs at the Great Lakes Energy Institute within the Case School of Engineering, also an entrepreneur. So it's very interesting that you went directly to a CEO position from your research position. How were you selected, or how did that process happen to where you made that transition?
Okay, well, actually, I did that. I misrepresented it. I did not go from. I started my career as a bench scientist, but in my 15 years at this company called Science Applications International Corporation, I held many jobs. So I started out as a research person, but I ran a P&L. I was a chief scientist of a large business unit. I started a Center for Advanced Materials. I ran I was a product manager. I ran had an HR function. I had all kinds of stuff. So I didn't go from bench scientist to CEO. I think that's a tough path to go down. What I will say though is that the company that I ran was when I started it. When I started running it, was not the founder. Was a highly technical company. So it was necessary, I felt, that the person that was running it had a deep technical knowledge, because that was, at the time, that was its that was the bread and butter. So I want to say that. And I'd met Kent Displays through, I won't go through the whole story, but I was actually a customer of theirs because we were developing a technology which I later utilized to turn to a consumer product, and blah blah blah. So it was a long and involved relationship.
That's fantastic. So you picked up a lot of those business management skills, actually doing that kind of work at a large company, working with a lot of people, picking up all those skills, and transition nicely.
Yes, I think it was helpful, Mark. I don't think it's essential that you work at a large company. I think it's helpful. I think there are some advantages because, for example, I ran a company that was very small, a few $1 million in revenue, and when I left, it had several tens of millions of dollars of revenue. And companies go through transitions during that time. And one of the things that's hard, I think, particularly for entrepreneurs who are doing startups, is recognizing when those transitions are necessary. Like, when do you really need HR? When do you really need processes? When do you really need to understand sales funnels and stuff like that? When do you really need to understand the difference between sales and marketing and stuff like that? And I think that I had not an understanding, but a familiarity and a respect for that, which was helpful. But I don't think it's essential. I think you can learn a lot of those things.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else has a question?
I'm seeing a couple
Hey,
questions.
Al.
Go ahead,
Justin.
Yeah.
Hi, Justin Calvitz. Al and I worked together for a little while at Kent Displays. And Al, it might be interesting for everybody to talk a little bit about being a young entrepreneur, especially people just starting off in their, let's say 20s and early 30s, and building a network of people, whether they work for you or just a support staff, in terms of structure of conversation, bouncing ideas off of people, and how to go about some of that.
Yeah, no, that's, networking is super important. One of the things that I do like, this is, and I'll speak to what Case does. I mean, I've been able to be directly and peripherally involved in seeing what the entrepreneurship, I don't want to say training, but the entrepreneurship educational process is like. And I think there is a strong emphasis on networking, which is critically important. I mean, Justin, you and I know that really well. I mean, you have to have a group of people, you could use the word confidants, some are, some aren't, who you can bounce ideas off of and who you can go to when you hit up against something that, frankly, you don't really understand, right? I mean, and so you can go to, the friends and family network and reach out to get insight into those questions. I think, and one of the things I'll speak to regarding that is that I think this is changing, but I think that the technical disciplines, when I was coming up, that was not at all emphasized. The importance of interpersonal skills and stuff like that was not at all emphasized when I was coming up. It is more so the case now. And I highly encourage that, because if you can't work with other people and if you can't, work within teams, I don't think you're going to be successful. I mean, I think they're very absolutes, but that's what I would say is kind of an absolute. So I think that kind of addresses it. I can talk more about that, but let me see what other questions I can pry out of people, the shy group.
Well, I guess I can ask you one if no.
Okay.
Okay. So you just mentioned people and working with others. So
Yeah.
when we talked privately, you mentioned how leadership and managing people is really important in entrepreneurship. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. So I think, the first thing I would say is, I think, if I look back on my career, I think I had good mentors and examples and bad mentors and examples, and hopefully you can learn from both of those. But I think that the top lying premise that I like to come to the table with, and this was one of Kent Display's core values, was you say the idea is more important than the person behind the idea. And that was critically important because, this is particularly the case with technology-based innovation, technology-based startups and stuff like that, is that it's so, you see it so much where the founders or the leaders, typically the leaders initially are the founders, they come at it with, I was the smartest guy in the room thing, and it never works. and what happens in those sorts of things is that, you get these, people that are super charismatic and they're brilliant. But what happens is they can only grow an organization or a business to a certain point. I have sort of a number of people that I think you can kind of, because it's sort of, it's 1 degree of separation kind of size, because every time they're in the room, they have to be the smartest. And so people are, it's their idea that has to win. And I think that just doesn't work. So that's one thing I would say, one guidepost. The second thing I would say about leadership is that one of the things that you really want to do, and I would say this for the budding CEOs, is that focus your energy on surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you. And this is why it doesn't work when you always have to project you're the smartest guy in the room. Surround yourself with people that are smarter than you and know more than you, and in areas. And so if I can just drill down a little bit more on that, is that what you have to do is you first have to recognize and internalize what you feel are your strengths and your weaknesses. And then the areas that you are weak, because no one's strong in everything, you seek to surround yourself with folks that are strong in those areas. And that's how you build a leadership team. And the focus is on the team. And you don't go in with the bullhorn that says, I know everything. And, you cede ground to other members of the leadership team that know stuff that you don't know. And I think that ultimately that is the thing that's needed to build a successful leadership team with legs, as opposed to, flash in the pan sort of stuff. So those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you for the insights.
Mateo, looks like Mateo's got a question, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so my name is Mateo Ni. So I graduated from the biology department a few years ago. So it was a science and technology entrepreneurship program. I'm sure some of you might have heard about it. So I'm also working with Al at Jumpstart on a variety of projects. So it's really helpful to hear some insights from Al. So I have 3 questions. So the first one, could you describe
one at a time, Mateo?
One at a time. Okay. So,
I'll forget. So I'll answer the first one.
Okay. So first one, could you describe how you went through the toughest periods in your career?
Wow, that's a good one. So first of all, shout out to Mateo. So I work with Mateo. In fact, Mateo and I were exchanging emails this morning on a variety of things, and he just does a great job in the stuff that we do, this venture services stuff that we offer at Jumpstart. So the toughest times in my career, boy, I can point to a few where, without going into specifics, I mean, you are going to fail at things, okay? And this comes back to this resilience thing. You are going to fail. I remember in graduate school, I had some failures, I remember early in my career at SAIC, I had some failures. And I can vividly point to things later in at Kent Displays as CEO that I would call, frankly speaking, I think they were failures on my part. And I think the key is that you learn from the failures. You try to be resilient, you learn, and you can you try, and this is really hard, to honestly self-evaluate as to what caused those failures and to try to avoid hopefully those things in the future. And then one of the things I would also add to that is I think it's super important that you surround yourself with a network of people that actually care about you and not just your accomplishments or what you're giving them, because you're going to need those people when you fail because, you're going to look up, it's going to look pretty dark. And surrounding yourself, whether that's friends, family, dog, cat, it's I think that's really important. Mateo, what's the next one?
Okay, so you just mentioned it's really important to have this resilience as a part of I would consider it as a part of your mindset. Are there any other important factors? If you think about the mindset, do you think it played a role in helping you go through those periods?
Yes. So I would say, I think that there are two competing things that are, I think, important for business people, professionals, but entrepreneurs specifically. On one hand, you got to be cocky as hell. Okay. And truth in lending, I've been accused of that. You have to think that a lot of stuff and that you can bring it on, and because that's necessary, that you have that fundamental. At the same time, I think now in my career, I think it's probably more important. So cockiness here, I would put the more important is humility. I think that humility balances the necessary cockiness. You have to that's necessary. The short answer. It's just a lot of lessons learned. The humility is super important. Yeah.
Okay, so I think the last question, so I'd like to ask for some advice for improving verbal communication skills.
Mateo, you get to cheat because we talk all the time. So
yeah.
I think the cool thing, the important thing is, I think practice helps a lot. I do encourage learning how to do public speaking, on forums. I remember, so I'll tell you the story. When I was a grad student, and when you're doing your research, you have to present papers, at various conferences and whatnot. And so by the time you get to be a fourth year student or fourth year student, you've started to accumulate a body of research that your advisor says, you're not just a contributor, please go present the paper, right? And I remember the first time that happened, I was so nervous. I was so nervous that I went to the bathroom right before and I threw up. I was just so nervous because of being a public speaker. But I came from a tradition of a family that had been, reasonable orators. And it's a skill that can be learned. And I've given probably hundreds and hundreds of speeches and stuff like that, and panels and stuff. And so I think it can be learned, but I think it's super important to be able to communicate verbally and written too. So other questions that I can take from the group. Yes,
I think we have a question from Zoe.
Okay.
You want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi, Dr. Green. I'm a CASE alumni, and so I'm in a PhD program in electrical engineering now. I'm a first year grad student, and I'm quite interested in entrepreneurship, but I have no clue how can I get any kind of experience as a grad student. So do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, wow, that's great. So you're a CASE grad student?
I'm at UVA now.
Oh, you're Virginia. Okay. So so you probably haven't, you're probably this summer taking your quals, or you may have already taken them, right?
Quals happens a year after. So it's probably next summer or something like that.
Oh, after your second year, or you just finished your first?
Yeah, after the first year.
Okay, I thought you had finished your first year. So yeah, it usually happens after your first year. So I think that the most important thing for you is that you what's going to happen, okay, is you're going to do your first year of courses and you're going to take your quals and hopefully pass. If not, you take them again, you'll pass, hopefully. And then what's going to happen is you're going to select a research group, essentially, it's sort of like a dating service, and you're going to select a research group, and they're going to select you, and you're going to a group that's got money or whatever to do your thesis research, which turns into your thesis, which, you graduate with your PhD. I'm assuming, are you in the PhD program?
Yeah, I'm in the PhD program.
Okay.
We already matched, so I have the advisor for at least 4 years of my time here.
Okay. The most important thing for you is that you choose an advisor that has, one, research areas that are relevant for applications. That's one that's super important. And two is that your advisor has connectivity in the area that they're working in industry. Okay. That's really important because your advisor, your research advisor, your thesis advisor is your gateway into sort of the applications areas that's going to lead to jobs and hopefully maybe potential startup opportunities and so on and so forth. So I hope, does that answer your question a little bit, Zoe?
Yeah, so the question is is there any other way I could somehow reach out to companies outside? Because my advisor is quite young. I'm not sure is there any connections in the industry?
Well, but you have the luxury, okay, of you're at UVA, which has a pretty vibrant. UVA is a tier 1 research institution, and so there's no rules that say you can't talk to other faculty and graduate students and postdocs and stuff like that. So don't be shy. I mean, nothing makes a researcher more excited than when someone comes to them and says, what are you working on? That looks pretty interesting. You'll be fighting to get out of their lab, because they want to talk about what they're doing. And so you're in this information gathering phase where gather as much information as you can, Zoe, as much as you can. And you have that luxury because, you're starting out as a grad student and so on. First year, you're going to be coursework. I mean, you're going to be doing a lot of coursework. So. Great. Okay, other questions?
Michael.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Zoe. So you got to look up our old case colleague, Michael Stradiff, who works in the tech transfer office down at UVA, if you haven't met him yet.
Oh, yeah, right. I talked to him too, by the way.
Let me ask a question about diversity in the startup world. I mean, obviously this is an interesting moment for our country on so many levels. I mean, we talked a lot about social justice, and there's obviously a lot of attention. I mean, the lack of diversity and underrepresented minorities in the startup world has been an issue for a long time. And because of events happening in our country, that help folks focus on this, I think there's some renewed conversations. My guess is in a lot of the work that you do, whether it's advising the Veale Institute and serving as an EIR, the work you jumpstart in the community, other boards, oftentimes, when you're looking around the smiling faces on a Zoom or on a boardroom, there's not often many other folks of color that are sitting on boards and CEOs of companies. So I'm sort of curious, just given your experience, both sort of running a company, sitting on boards and advising, at this moment, whether it's in Northeast Ohio or sort of the country, what are some things that we should be doing to change that?
Well, first thing I'd say is if I knew the answer, I'd be a very wealthy man right now, I think. Michael, it's a tough thing it's a tough nut to crack. I mean, I could talk for hours on what I think are the challenges what I think the opportunities and my own experiences. As I've progressed through my career, I've been able to reflect back at engagements and circumstances where I think that some of the things that people complain about were clearly in play. I didn't recognize that. I typically don't. I didn't recognize, but in retrospect, it certainly was. I mean, when people talk about systemic things, there's certain things that I can, really personally attest to. So I think it's a tough nut to crack. Let me give you two sides of that. The first thing, not sides of that, but sides of your question. On one hand, I have the thing I utilize is, when I'm a Black CEO of a tech, consumer products company. Is there two or three of us? Maybe there's four. I mean, there's not that many. There's not that many of us. And so when I do engage in the broader community, people remember who I am because I look different. Okay, I look different. So I can't tell you how many times, because it happens all the time, where someone will say, well, I met you so-and-so. I have no idea. I mean, I don't remember meeting him because I look different. And so, that's not a knock on anything. It's just I look different. So people tend to remember me. And I use that to my advantage. And I think it's a great, because people can remember me and I can, engage with people and help with networking and all kinds of stuff, try to be, clear spoken and stuff like that. The flip side of it, so that's the real shining positive. The flip side is, I'll be honest, it's tough being the only one. There are certain just biases that people have. I mean, I think we all face this in some way or another. I think that people that are not in the majority group, whether it be female, whether it be not in the majority group of the circle that they're running in, there's an inherent attempt for people to put you in a box. They're always struggling to put you in a box. I mean, it's so strange how, my last comment would be, I'll jump into a discussion or something and, someone will, so where'd you get your PhD? I mean, I got my PhD 30 years ago. Okay. And people are asking me, so because they're trying to put me in a box. They're trying to figure out, where does this guy fit in? And it's sort of, it's like, seriously, but just those are a few thoughts on that. One of the things that I wanted to just make sure I got in there is, I was talking a little bit. I'm going to just take a step back, a bit of an earlier question about entrepreneurship. You're going to come across things that you fail, and I talked about, personality traits and surrounding yourself, resilience, and surrounding yourself with people that can kind of help pick you up when you fail. And it's, again, I want to talk about the balance again, because I remember when I was a graduate student at Stanford, and I was doing my thesis research at SLAC, at Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. I was doing synchrotron radiation, but that's a different subject. But anyway, I had gotten to know a guy named Burt Richter, who was a director of SLAC. Burt Richter won the Nobel Prize in Physics in '76. I got to know him really well, actually. I knew his son, who was also a graduate student at the time, but we had lots of conversations. He's since passed away. But I remember him telling me, at that time in my career, I was, young, early 20s or something like that. He was, I thought, well, I'm going to be a physicist, research scientist or whatever. And he told me, he said, to do this, of course, he had recently won a Nobel Prize, but he said, if you want to do that, you have to be, quote, monomaniacal. That was the term he used. And I've never forgotten that. And I've chewed on that. And I think that, again, I come back to that balance, of monomaniacal, but also having perspective. Because one of the struggles is that when you're monomaniacal about something, we all judge ourselves. And so you judge yourself based on that singular focus that you have. And if you fail on that, it's like you fail in that, then you feel like you're a failure. If everything in my life is about the coursework that I'm taking and I fail an exam, then I must be a failure. And so you have to balance it with outside interests and stuff so that when you do fall down, you have other ways that you can look and say, well, I'm okay with that too. So a couple of thoughts. So more other questions.
Thanks.
We have a question from Raekwon.
Hi, Raekwon. You got to take yourself off mute.
There we go. Hi, Al.
Hi, Raekwon.
So I know you from your consulting work with Jumpstart, as Michael mentioned, and I'm always really interested when I get a chance to talk to the consultants and how they found themselves in that position. How did you find yourself enough experience, enough expertise? At what point did you realize that was something you could do? Because it's a pretty unusual career, you know what I mean? No one
being a consultant, or are you talking about being a consultant or CEO of a company? Which one are you talking about?
The consultant part.
Okay. It's not unusual at all, to be honest. I'll say, Raekwon, I think that, my own personal opinion is I think that one of the things with COVID is that you'll probably see more of that business model of people, and part of that's because you can be remote and people basically, their product is themselves and they're going to sell their product to people all over the place. So I don't think I don't think it's unique, and I think it's actually going to grow. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is you typically, the kind of consultancy that I do, it is rare for people that are just starting out there in their career. They can be a consultant, but they're going to be at they might go to like McKinsey or Boston Consulting or whatever, or any, Booz Allen, but they're going to be an associate or something like that. They're not going to be, the lead on the customer engagement when you're early in your career. You may later on. Which leads me to the final point, is because I think, over the course of your career, you develop a network, and it's, as Justin pointed out, the importance of the network that you develop, and those people that are part of your network will be customers, they will be partners, and they will be and they'll be subcontract people that you might subcontract stuff to. So the key is the network, and I've been doing this stuff for 30 years, so I have a network, and so it's not so challenging.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have a question from Grant.
Hi, Grant.
Hi, Al. How are you today?
Good.
This has been fascinating, and thanks so much for sharing with the community here. One thing we hear so often from entrepreneurs is that need to pivot and recognizing when to pivot. And obviously, it's there's no one size answer fits all here. But I was wondering if you could share some of the pivots that you experienced at Kent Displays. How did you know when to pivot, and who helped you make those decisions? And were they more on the business side or more on the technical side?
Yes. They're all yeses. I see Justin nodding his head because he was a part of some of those big pivots. It's a great question, Grant. First of all, I think I'd be lying if I said in advance when to pivot, because I think a lot of it's chance. There's some guideposts I would point to. And one of the things I always said at Kent Displays is that when in doubt, do something, and don't get into the paralysis of analysis. Do something, and a good indication of when to pivot is when what you're doing ain't working. Maybe it's time but there's, that's an indication that, time to pivot. I mean, we went through a huge pivot. I mean, we turned ourselves from an IP licensing company to a consumer products company and grew like 60 employees over the course of like a year. I mean, talk about a pivot, and turned ourselves into a manufacturing company. And it was huge. But again, this is where I said early on, be cautious of those that know too much. Because, I think the reason why we did it, and I would say we were successful, was because we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. And if we would have asked, they would have said, how dare you? There's no chance you can do that. And so we were, dumb. We said, I can do that. One of my charts I've given years ago in a talk, when we were faced with this, okay, let's turn ourselves into a consumer products company. The answer was, we're physicists. We can do anything. I can sell product at Walmart. I'm a physicist. I can do anything. But I think it was that kind of attitude that allowed us to be, successful. And then you surround yourself with people that understand a lot more about, and you got to learn yourself. You got to surround yourself, and you learn, you enable, and you try to do it that way. I guess. I hope that's a bit of an answer.
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for maybe like one or two more questions. So
great.
If anyone has something to ask, I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to take your time. And thanks for the nice words about physics. I wasn't sure about my major, but I'm definitely more sure after today.
No, you should feel good about it.
Okay. Okay. No one seems to have a question, so I'll go. And if you find a question in the meantime, just interrupt me. So maybe given the current situation of the pandemic, what do you think? Like, does entrepreneurship play any role in it? Can it help us? I don't know, transition to the next age?
Yeah, no, I mean, and yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned. I'm far from the purveyor of knowledge on all things, pandemic outcome, but I can say a few observations that I would say. I think that first of all, we are looking at an inflection point. Okay, this is an inflection point. And, there are going to be repercussions and fundamental societal changes in business world across society that are going to come out of this pandemic. A couple observations I would make just in even on sort of these Zoom calls, I think that there are tremendous efficiency gains that people recognize and will utilize in the future. I mean, a lot of the engagements, I've gone from today virtually, I've gone from a meeting in Kent to a meeting in Cleveland at Case Western to a meeting in Cleveland somewhere with someone I was Zooming with and, face to face. And, in the past that would not have been possible because, I'd be driving between place to place, one. The primary reason is because people didn't accept that this mode of communication was okay. It was meet in person or talk on the phone. And the difference, the bandwidth gain of phone, email versus phone versus in person, there were just huge gaps. Okay. And so people were in meetings all the time and in meetings and going from meeting to meeting. And if I can go from a meeting to a meeting in person with a bandwidth that's okay, it's not the same bandwidth of in person, but it's a higher bandwidth than on the phone, that's great. That's great. And I think those are huge efficiency gains. The second thing I would say is that with that, there has to be there's going to be innovations in one of the things that you miss on these sorts of things is the what I call engineered the collisions. And I think that these sort of frames, these sort of areas where we gather on like a Zoom call, you have to be able to figure out how do you engineer collisions that lead to innovations. I mean, there's no coffee break where we're walking out in the hall and I'm going to say, hey, Todd or Raekwon, what'd you think of this? Or someone's going to grab me on the side and say, hey, Al, what'd you think of that? I mean, we don't have that. We're all facing each other. And so I think there's going to be innovations about how do you do that remotely, AR, VR, stuff like that. So I'll pause there and see if I think you said there's a little more time for other questions. So I want to.
Yeah, we have a question from LinkedIn. So Patrick Smith, who is Executive Vice President at KeyBank, has a question. How has being a Black man impacted the way you lead?
Wow. Ideally, I would want to say that it has no impact, ideally. And I think that would be a lie. I think that's not true. I think that the easiest way for me to answer that would be to say that for others that are in leadership positions, with a fair amount of responsibility, I think that the challenge is that you are put up in many ways as a role model, and so you can get you can be concerned that and overly concerned with the fact that you are the representative, okay, and so the rest of people that look like you will be judged based on your success and failure. And the fact of the matter is, part of that's true. The downside is that can end up with a tremendous amount of pressure that you can put on yourself and others. So I think it can be bad. There are other things too that would probably take me longer to dive into. Patrick, what's your last name, Patrick? I'd be happy to chat with you about it later.
It's Patrick Smith who put the question in KeyBank. I'll make sure that you guys are connected up.
Yeah, I love that. That'd be great.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for your answers. I don't think we have any more time, unfortunately, but I definitely learned a lot. I'm sure others did. Yeah. So thanks for talking to us.
My pleasure. I probably enjoyed it and learned more the questions than you all learned from the answers.
Not true. So let me just jump in and Errol, thank you so much for moderating. It's great to have, we're a global campus, more so this semester than ever. So for those who joined late, Errol is joining us from his home in Sarajevo, Bosnia. So we hope this is a good semester for you, and we look forward to seeing you back in Cleveland and on campus soon. Al, thank you for doing this today. I know you've been a participant in a number of these events and an active questioner. So it's nice to see you on the hot seat and fielding all the questions. And we really do appreciate your partnership and the work that you're doing on our campus with the Veale student and in the community. It's great. I'm going to make a couple of quick just administrative announcements about upcoming events. We have 2 events tomorrow. For those that are interested, at 10 a.m. Eastern, we're going to be joined by Philip Karakafe, who's the CEO of Startup Bootcamp in Cape Town, South Africa. This is actually part of a course that I'm teaching this semester called Beyond Silicon Valley, and we are doing a deep dive on South Africa. So there'll be, if you're able to join, you'll see a group of about 17 undergrad students from CASE, and we have about 50 South African participants from a number of different places in South Africa, including the University of the Western Cape, which is a historically Black university in South Africa. So that'll be at 10 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. And then we'll be back with our sort of traditional speaker series at 1 p.m. tomorrow. Sean Higgins, who's a CASE alum, is the co-founder and CEO of the Herjavec Group. And for those of you that are Shark Tank fans, the Herjavec Group co-founder is Robert Herjavec, who is one of the sharks on Shark Tank. So Sean will talk about his career journey and talk about cybersecurity and coaching in particular. So those are 2 events we have for you at 10 a.m. tomorrow and 1 p.m. tomorrow. So with that, Errol and Al, thank you again for doing this, and thanks everybody for joining, and hope to see you maybe as soon as tomorrow.
Shout out to Veale and your great stuff you guys are doing, Michael.
Great. Thanks, Al. Thanks, Errol.